I'm Mark Holt. I'm the Commercial Manager here at PP. I'm joined today with my colleagues, Thomas Haig, who's Building Safety and Sustainability Lead, and Paula Nutkins, who is the Project Coordinator responsible for green technologies. What we want to cover today is, if we just do can you do the next slide, please? Thank you. Yeah, so the agenda today will cover those topics as an overview of the actual work that we're looking to provide you with. And it is very much like a headline view of what is called practice in writing retrofit specifications. So obviously there is, when you look at actually a well-written specification, and the sort of the works themselves, you know, they have funding agreements in there with payments depending on certification and obviously completion of the works. And you know, you do see there's new emerging suppliers that are actually bidding for the work. So it does provide, you know, additional challenges. Those organisations are not always best suited to understand tender documentation, which makes it more important to actually look at the detail on compliance processes for funding with those necessary minimum accreditations. And not to assume that the bidders will be experienced in completing the tenders. That's something that we really do find, because, you know, along with the sort of construction work as well. So obviously a well-written specification, you know, it does set the boundaries on future management of the contract, but also looks at that potential challenges as well from an unsuccessful bidder, that if the tender documents didn't fully describe the works to be completed and the process with clear risk allocation between the parties. So the aim is to actually avoid any misunderstanding with a streamlined procurement process with clear criteria on the evaluation of the bid and the supplier selection. So when you're looking at that, you know, the headline things, understanding the properties, you know, need to understand the housing stock, that's key. You know, solid wall construction, non-traditional types of works, specifying the retrofit measures correctly in the specification in tenders is important, and also looking at different thermal performance, because that is crucial for that effective planning. It is, you know, it does seem quite obvious, but it is very much important just to sort of reiterate that at this point and stage. Just move to the next slide again, please. Next one. You know, we need to consider sort of the non-traditional construction elements with the specification on, you know, on the works that we're moving forward, which is what to think about. But also when you're looking at the survey and the properties, identifying the specific needs and challenges, you know, getting that, you know, not using cloned information on the surveys, really doing sort of like understanding the data for the specifications so that all the relevant aspects are addressed. And that's particularly relevant to when you're working on non-traditional properties, ensuring that the existing structure is structurally sound as well. Move on to the next one, please. But also we need to consider the non-construction elements as well. So it's something which, with the specification, needs to look at the restrictions on access to the properties, providing CDM information on the health and safety risk, you know, reminding the bidders that it's occupied homes, the potential issues with access, storage, welfare facilities for actually their employees and contractors. So it's making sure that's really clear in the documentation what the minimum standards are. You know, to maintain that safe and tidy working environment is key, and the specification needs to provide those boundaries in addition to the basic HSE requirements. So it's very much providing the bidders at that initial stage with a clear template of how the works is going to be delivered and what the minimum standards are. And it doesn't then rely on the contractors then just purely just, you know, believing that they can put like a minimum site set up on the scheme, that it's actually fully resourced and really clear. With that, I'd like to pass you over to my colleague Thomas, who will define the scope and the objectives.
Thanks so much.
You can just start.
So yeah, Rob, if you can just advance slide. Great, thanks. So I'll be talking about scope here. I think there's some elements that are perhaps specific to retrofit. I'll get that on to the next slide. And there's some stuff that's applicable to procurement in general. And when I look at this is procurement in general. So a key way that I like to approach procurement is start with the end in mind. So that should be help you with your scope and your specification to be articulating through the specification what you want to be happening, how you want the project to be delivered, how you want it, technical performances and all this kind of thing. So the scope is super important, really, to as a process for you as the landlord to think about how it's going to be delivered and what it's going to be delivered. And I often find actually writing that specification and the project boundaries a useful way in my mind to be going through and imagining what the kind of issues you could face. Thinking about the assumptions that you're making and articulating those, getting those written down. And fundamentally, this will help reduce risk. The more vague you are in your specification and your scope, then the more risk that contractors will price in as well. So that clarity on what you want to achieve and how you want to achieve it and where responsibilities lie are really good, not just for this, for any procurement exercise. If we can go on to the next slide, Rob. Yeah, particularly in retrofit, there are some, in these grant-funded work streams, there are some prerequisites about what needs to happen. So we need to be very clear that EPCC needs to be achieved, and that should be clearly expressed in the specification. You need to think about what the eligible measures are. We'll be following the PAS 2035 methodology, and then the contractors will be PAS 2030 registered through Trustmark, and then it will be lodging all the measures through Trustmark. So these, having an understanding of what boxes that will need to be ticked to get the grant need to be expressed in the specification, and also probably as you want to filter out any contractors who either can't deliver that or don't have the applicable accreditations. If we can just go to the next slide, thanks. So as you're approaching that, I think typically do it from fabric first approach. So we'll be thinking about the insulation. You'll be trying to balance the measures to get to that EPC with the cost. You've got a certain budget, and you need to be looking at how you can maximise that spend. So things like loft top-ups are really cost effective and good. Although I think we're probably reaching the end of those now. So I think that the point we want to make here is having this understanding and clarity up front, knowing your stock, as Mark said, about understanding the archetypes you're working in, understanding where they are. And the EPC is important as well. When was that EPC taken? Is it up to date? We have seen some issues with landlords not necessarily understanding their stock as they should, and being surprised sometimes when contracts turn up. But yeah, understanding of what you want to do will be fundamental. Okay, then I'll just talk, if we can advance the slide. Yeah, I'll talk about resident engagement and handover. So again, not just retrofit, but in all planned investment programs, so when we're working on people's homes, that resident engagement is super important. We strongly suggest that you include your access protocol as part of the specification, usually as an appendix or something, so contractors can be clear about how they're going to engage with residents. And there's certain streams that I think education of residents is really important. So particularly, say, air source heat pumps, which requires a change of behaviour in how you use your heating systems. We're a big fan of education residents before you start, to let them know, during the project to remind them, and then afterwards as well. So for me, a successful project is not just about the technical implementation, it's about winning people's hearts and minds over, so they know how to use the equipment effectively. I mean, particularly in air source heat pumps, you cannot be using an air source heat pump the same way as you use your combi boiler before. So if we want to make sure that we're driving people's energy bills down, the way they use the equipment will be really important. Yeah, and I mean, as with all your planned investment programs, that's making sure that that the residents are happy. We sometimes suggest doing a questionnaire afterwards to get residents' feedback about the process and how good the contractors were. If you're going to do that, I'd probably make in the specification, I'd be making the contractors aware of what you plan to do as that handover process. I think, can we go to the next slide? I'll hand over back to Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So, obviously, I'm looking at the technical side of the specification and the requirements of that. As Tom mentioned, then the key component is that past 2035 methodology is that component that needs to be really clear in the specification, as that is the funding must comply with that to actually be eligible. And the retrofit suppliers are required to be focusing on the well-being of the residents, and that's central to the planning and delivery of the projects as well. Just a reminder also there on Section 20 leasehold consultation as well, which may be affected by the works. It's something, if there is a leaseholders, that needs to be fully described within the specification and understood by the bidders. And with the aim of past 2035 is to ensure that there is a high quality, product, prioritise energy efficiency, and the resident well-being is key to that. And those, all those requirements on the detail need to be fully described in the specification to ensure the work complies with the funding agreement. That for us is key. That funding agreement needs to be redacted and provided within the specification. That's what we would recommend. Also, with the form of contract, the articles need additional articles there to reference back that document, so that the contractors bidding for the work are under no illusions of actually what's required of them, because that's, for us, we see that as a real positive moving forward. We have had instances where you get really good main contractors who try and pick up the retrofit work, picking up the lodgements and the certification, the accreditation side. And it does take them, there's a pretty steep learning curve on those contracts. So it's ensuring the right contractors selected in the first place. And that's where obviously a well-written specification does come into. You just do it.
Oh, sorry, Mark, I was just interrupting. Just to make people aware that the PAS 2035 methodology is now publicly available, so you can download it from the BSI. Yeah. And I'd recommend that wholeheartedly. It provides a very good guideline about how to do retrofit.
Thanks, Tom. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, as we just touched on, then the specification must clearly reference adherence to the manufacturer's instructions on materials and equipment to ensure that compliance. And the main one is on the warranties. Good example, external wall insulation. So it's to ensure that the work's installed in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. And an important part is the actual detail as well within the specification. So in a scheme where it's not fully designed and the retrofit designs are still ongoing, to provide details within the specification and the pricing documents on those standardised sort of wall bridge detail. If you take EWI as an example, the eaves detail, the sort of the detail around the windows, doors, openings, at low level interaction with suspended floors and concrete floors, those types of things. As a minimum, put the standardised details in from the survey for the housing stock, so that the contractors have actually then provided a basis for pricing. So that it hasn't then been issued out as a document that's in effect defective because it doesn't cover all the elements that are key. And that ensures that the suppliers are then provided with sufficient information to assess the work contents and resource and price it as well. So that's really important. Because a final reminder on that as well is to provide the minimum technical requirements to the specification is when you look at earth source heat pumps, is provide that information on the seasonal coefficient of performance or the seasonal performance factor for the energy evaluation. We've seen that increasingly now come up with from bidders in competitions where you're getting informed bidders now are actually requiring that information. So it's something to bear in mind on that. And just to add to that, with the specifications and on the technical side, it's to ensure that when the bidders have priced the scheme, they fully understand it's been described. It's a management tool then for the successful contractor, for yourselves to actually work as what the agreement is, what the minimum standard is, but also from an unsuccessful bidder's perspective, if the specifications are really clear and well understood by the bidders, it reduces the potential risk of a challenge that, as a team, we've not provided them with sufficient information, or we've not provided the correct level of detail for them to make that pricing sort of like, and that's something to bear in mind as well moving forward. And then I'll just hand you back to Tom now to go through compliance and quality standards.
Yeah, thanks. So, Rob, if you can just advance it. Yeah. So I'm conscious I've got a former QS sitting next to me, but there is. This is just saying there's more than just price, and delivering quality projects is really important. And we can build up that quality assurance through a number of ways. One is around accreditation. So it's a requirement for this funding that if you're doing, the measures will be lodged with Trustmark, have 2030 certified contractors doing various work streams. Then if where MCS is relevant, like PV, that'll be MCS. Again, this is all stuff that needs to be put in the specifications. If there's particular accreditations that you can save yourself that are required, then you can save yourself a whole lot of time by just making that an absolute requirement as part of the tender process. And we're a big fan of third party accreditations and avoids you sort of having to reinvent the wheel to work out what does good workmanship look like and the sort of training and skills that are needed. If you just go on to the next slide, please. Rob, yeah. So yeah, at the specification stage, have a think about and probably describe what's sign off handover looks like. We're keen on you only pay for the works when they've been approved by you as the customer. But that handover process needs to be very clear, because fundamentally that's going to drive how payments happen, or if you end up in dispute. So you need to make sure you have a process where you can own what's being done, or you've got an employer's agent or a contract administrator who can do this for you. But having a clear process up front about what handover looks like is really important, and it will help it helps the contractors understand those rules as well. And then if we can go to the next slide, Rob, thanks. Yeah, and this is just reiterating that quality is not just one thing you do. Quality assurance is about having a number of different elements that can help. It doesn't guarantee, nothing guarantees you success, but having these elements can work in your favour. So ensuring that the contractors are trained, you as a client are trained in past 2035 or whatever you understand retrofit, the importance of inspections and supervision, documentation and the evidence of what work's been gone on, and then feedback cycle, so you can improve in the future as well, understand what could have been improved and how you can improve in the future, because we've all got an awful lot of stock to get through. Okay, and then if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, this is just talking about the importance of clarity as well. So whilst it may be clear in your mind about what you want, that the purpose of that specification, the tender process, is to clarify for your bidders exactly what you want. And so that'll typically be the quality elements of the tender, a really good opportunity for you to let the bidders know what are the drivers for you. So for example, if they've got their project plans, their approach to quality, etc., the quality is something you should think about very deeply, because it will play a really important part of the tender. And then also, it's not just actually the tender. What we would typically do through the life of the project, we will be constantly referring back to what their submissions were to see this is what they said they were going to do in the tender, and mark that, and then hold them to account in terms of the actual delivery as well. We've given some examples here of quality questions, but I do suggest you think individually about your organisation and about this work in retrofit, about what what good looks like, and having a view and a vision of what good looks like. How would a good contractor behave, and trying to articulate that in the quality questions is really helpful, and that will help you get the right contractor. The next slide, thanks. So when we're doing quality questions, a really important thing there is not just the question itself, but the guidance that you have. So that will help clarify how you're going to mark the question, the responses, and avoid challenges in the future. So think clearly about the question, and then provide clear guidance about what you expect to see in a good answer, or in an answer. So both in terms of content and what the score, how the scoring will be impacted by what you see. Avoid ambiguity. We need to be very clear here, because often the scoring on these quality questions could often determine which bidder you use. So it's really important to be clear and unambiguous. And we've just given some examples here. We probably wouldn't use 25% cost, but we've just given some examples here of perhaps an approach to scoring, thinking about the technical capability, the delivery plan. Social value is really important. We'll be talking about that towards the end of the presentation, and cost as well. And cost is often the easiest one to score, but it shouldn't necessarily be your driver. If we want to drive for quality installs, have better resident satisfaction, have fewer call outs once we've done the work, then cost could well be perhaps 40 or 50% of it in all. It's not necessarily going to be an 80% cost project, we don't think. Quality is really important. And then let me just hand over to Mark, if I can, just on the next slides. Thanks.
Just up with reference to the quality section and the quality price split within the tender. It's a really good mechanism in that you've got an emerging market where there's a number of new contractor suppliers coming into that market. So you don't want the price to be 100% price, because the industry needs to sort of provide a high quality product at a sustainable price from the information that's been provided in the specification. So even though we put 25% price there, which was a bit, we had this discussion, as a quantity surveyor, I would probably go 60-40, 6% price, 4% quality. But when you're looking at that quality submission, what you're looking to do with the bidders is them to demonstrate their ability to understand what's expected for the accreditations, for the lodgements, understanding the past requirements for 2035, how they will deliver the work from the information you've provided, from the information that you provided on the pricing elements. Does the specification of the pricing document match up with what you envisage the measures to be? Are the quantities reasonable? Are they a good assessment of what the value of the works is going to be, so that we don't have abnormally low or abnormally pricing that come through on the price information? But when you look at a quality score and you're marking quality a lot higher because the deliverables are so critical with the funding agreement, it's ensuring that those records of the scoring are meticulous, the records are kept, and that you provide feedback then to the bidders, because those bidders then can improve. So you may well find a contractor, supplier that's really good at delivering the work, but they struggle to actually do the written submission side. And that's where you can obviously provide that feedback, which helps them move forward. Also, those details then sort of mitigates the risk of a challenge of an unsuccessful bidder. And if you've got a bidder that's been really, really, engaging with you, really wants the work, and then they put a lot of time, effort, cost in actually tendering for the work, for them to lose it because they've lost it on a quality question. Prices, it's straightforward. You put the price in, ourselves at PP or yourselves will then be doing that price evaluation. You'll be understanding on the pricing. You'll be looking for abnormally low, abnormally high pricing, so that the contracts haven't misunderstood the specification, checking they're understanding the specifications right. That is, what we do standard day in, day out. But in retrofit works, it is more critical. There's a number of new companies coming to the market. They've got limited, general construction. They've got good understanding retrofit work, but some of the general construction and the ways in which they tenders can be a little bit out. And for us, we always, if we put a tender out here, we're looking to sort of like have a range of about 10% between the price that comes back in. If we get out of that margin, is there something that's missing in the specification? For the questions and answers during the tender period, if we're being asked a lot of questions, is our specifications defective? Is there issues we're missing? Yeah. And this one, it goes right back to when you're doing the surveys at the beginning. So that's really as a, to try and tie in together what we're talking about. That's what's key. Yeah. Just moving forward, so looking at avoiding common pitfalls, and I'll start off with a contract, but when considering common pitfalls, it's the project, obviously the parties, the first thing everybody does is they reach for the contract documents. And we all do it. If you get a problem, the first thing people do is pull the contract out. Increasingly, you're seeing contract conditions are becoming a little bit more risk allocations key. There's obviously been a real sort of driver in the last probably 7 to 8 years of actually looking at that risk on retrofit works and on more planned wider works. As people start looking at the word in the specifications, the pricing documents, the contract conditions. So it's just to understand when you're writing the specifications, is that for planned works and the solutions that the suppliers, fully priced planned resources that are required, which then avoids those common pitfalls where things haven't been fully designed, haven't been, the correct detail has been issued with the tender, there's been assumptions made, and those assumptions don't come out, and then the supplier contractor then is looking for sort of a redress because they've either misunderstood, or it could argue that we as a procurement team have misled them on the pricing, not intentionally. So the form of contract obviously allocates the risk between the parties. That's key, and that provides that clarity. Now, in the traditional approach, a fixed price contract is what we as an industry we're common to use with. We provide sufficient information for the bidders to assess the opportunity, and they can price the works. When the specification and price document doesn't replicate that, that's when we get disputes and claims for additional monies, and that's when the issues start happening. So yourselves may wish to consider earlier supply engagements, joint surveys potentially, that pre-construction services agreement approach for the design, and then the second stage potentially where you then do a second stage tender to actually agree the cost, or alternatively agree up front on the overheads and profit and do an open book cost plus contract. Myself as a QS, not really a big fan of them. I'd much rather have a fixed price. But if you want somebody to do a fixed price contract, you've got to provide them sufficient information to be able to assess what the value is and give you that. And there's obviously there's options within the common contracts for, we call it a time and materials contract, but it's in effect day work, which is not something which be commonly done, but it is an option to look at avoiding pitfalls. And now if you just move on to the next slide, again, another one is that roles and responsibilities. We need to be accountable right from the start. All the parties need to understand who's doing what, who's responsible for what. It seems pretty obvious to discuss it and say, well, surely that we all know what we're doing, but the number of schemes you get where things fall between contractor, where there's maybe a design element on air source heat pumps. EWI is another good one where you get a system manufacturer, specifier being specified, and there's that who's actually picking up that design, who's responsible to ensure it complies with, making that really clear. And then it's getting that, the client retrofit designer role. That can be the retrofit designer, employer agent, or it could be the contract administrator. So it's understanding between the parties who's responsible. The benefit of your standard suite of contracts is those items can be described and fully detailed, but you've got the ability with the form of contract to avoid the pitfalls, to include in that the funding agreement with a redacted version of that, so it enables the contract to understand it. The actual process for putting the lodgements in, get that in the contract as well, so that then it's clear how the payment stages will be made, what's expected from the contractor. If you get an opportunity where you've got quality questions, you may have a quality question asking the contractor how they're going to manage the record keeping and the documentation to evidence the work they've done. Again, it seems dead simple, but it's if it's in there and the parties are made aware of it, that responsibility can be clearly assigned to the most relevant person within the team. And then it just limits that disruption, pitfalls where scheme gets finished and then somebody's running around trying to take 500 photographs there to evidence what they've actually done. So it's simple things like that, which if they're fed into the specification, do assist you moving forward. And if we just move on to the next slide, please. So again, this does tie in with the work, and that, social value outcomes are key. The specification does need to incorporate that social value. It's a requirement from government on that, and to actually enhance the project, the sort of community benefit and the impact locally. Now, the specification needs to sort of describe the strategies to maximise that social value. You can put a social value question in the quality section, get the contractors to explain what they're doing, but that's looking mainly around local hiring, engagement with the local supply chain, local community, upskilling the workforce is what opportunities there on the scheme, gas engineers to do air source heat pumps, looking for getting people trained up to do loft insulation, cavity wall insulation. Certainly the EWI works and internal wall insulation is a highly skilled trade. The end finished product is a highly skilled trade controlled by a manufacturer's system with an approved list of contractors. But again, that needs to be heavily policed. Certainly recently we've all seen that there's been quite a lot of issues with that element of work, where there's been a lack of supervision and a lack of quality control that needs picking up. So it's feeding that upskilling into the industry, but also that training as well. So there's that providing that training requirements. We understand the need for that positive outcomes moving forward, but it's that legacy workforce moving on when that scheme finishes. So it's then ensuring that there's that workforce, because as the work does increase, which you will have to do, it then enables the contractors to get the experience moving forward. That means then as they get more experience, then they get more efficient the way they work, the workforce gets more efficient, and then that benefit feeds through moving forward. And that's, for me, if you just want to go to the next slide, that's just back to yourself, Rob, but just as a quick summary of what we've just gone through this afternoon. It's just a bit of as I said at the start, just a little bit an overview of the key points to consider and bear in mind. The differences of funded retrofit work as opposed to existing planned works. What the pitfalls are with the understanding the properties, not relying heavily on previous data on surveys, which was something which we talked about. Understanding the stock, understanding the location of the stock, ensuring that the sufficient welfare facilities are described in the documentation. Understand the contractor knows what your minimum standards are on resident engagement, site facilities, welfare, hours of work, access arrangements into the properties to actually build that relationship with them, so that it's really clear right the way through. And that when you're looking at the specifications are relevant to the scheme that's being completed. That's the key one. That comes from sensible surveys and understanding of what the work. That also feeds into that when you put the original submission in and been successful, understanding what the budget was, what the elements work, and then if you then receive the funding allocation, how that now feeds into what have you received from what you bid for. How does that look then when you actually feed that back into the specification, the works moving forward, and that for us is how you can support then to ensure that the scheme started, it select the right contractor with the right level of experience, but also selects the right team from the project delivery side, again with the right experience, so they can support the contractor in delivering the scheme. And I'll hand you over to Rob from TNT on the resources.